Okay, today I'm doing something a little bit different for this channel. I'm going to be showing you the behind the scenes of how I am making some silicone filigree molds. If you're not sure what I'm talking about these guys here, and they might look familiar if you've been watching my channel for some time. I love to use these filigrees on a lot of my gowns. So my gowns like this one here, which was an autumn court gown, and this one here, which was for my Elsa gown, and this particular one is one of my favorites, and it was not cheap for the mold to make this. Now, when I'm making these, which they're just made out of hot glue, it's like nothing crazy and they're super bendable. They are really, really durable. I love using hot glue for these. The mold portion of this that I used to make them, it was not cheap. It was like $50 just for the mold itself. And I had bought two from this one company a while ago, and it ended up running me just under $80 to have these two molds sent. And these are big molds, so I can completely understand that. But yeah, it was not cheap and they're no longer around. There's a few other companies out there on Etsy and whatnot that you can get molds from, and they're really pretty, but they're not always the ones that I particularly want to use. Like, I like ones that have a lot of detail and that are really, really, that look like this, that are like the pretty scroll work and things. So I'm going to be making my own molds today, and I thought I would show you how I do that. Now you can of course find other types of silicone molds like these ones here, which are a little bit smaller, and they're just as pretty. They're very detailed. You can usually find them in your local craft store in the baking section, like for fondant and things like that. People use them for wedding cakes and all those types of things. You can also find them on places like AliExpress, Amazon, and they usually come in like one piece of silicone that has maybe 4 or 5 different types of filigrees or designs in it. And you just fill them. For me, I just use hot glue in mine. You can also use things like Cos clay, or you can use foam clay. Some people use actual silicone and things like that. A really cool trick is using caulking, like the type of bathroom caulking, to fill it, but it takes a really long time for it to completely set. And they come out pretty cool. They actually are super, super flexible, a lot like this, and they're pretty durable as well. I just don't like waiting that long. And most of mine tend to be made with exactly that, just some hot glue, and I spray paint them down with Rust-Oleum spray paint that is in like a metallic gold or silver. And I've seen some other people have really cool luck with spray painting them down with black spray paint first, and then putting the metallic on top, which gives it a nice depth to the filigree itself. So I'm going to be trying that, but for today, some of the pieces that I'm going to be using might kind of surprise you. So because the molds that I had used for this are ridiculously expensive, or were ridiculously expensive, and the company is no longer around and I can't find the pieces that I really like, I have done things like use a resin 3D printer to try and make prototypes for creating molds and whatnot. And my 3D printer is very temperamental, and it is not, it's a bear to kind of work with. It's very messy. It takes up a lot of space in the garage and stuff to use it. And it is very, very time consuming because there's a lot of steps and a lot of process to making it. My partner and I have had great luck making larger figurines, surprisingly, but making little things like this has been proving to be very, just not the easiest thing for us to do. So having said that, because we have not perfected that, and I do need to work on some other projects and I want some new filigrees for it, I ran down to Home Depot and I picked up some of these. And these are just embellishments that you can find in the woodworking section, and you basically use these, if you were to use them as the wood pieces, you use them for making stuff like this, for adding embellishments to furniture, for adding it to crown molding, to bedrooms, around windows and things like that. But I'm going to be using it as my base for creating my silicone mold. So I'm going to run through quickly all of the different elements that I'm going to be using today in case you want to follow along, or if you are interested in what, kind of goes into this. And then we'll get working on creating the mold itself. So number one is you need your master, which is this here for me. I'm going to be using this as my masterpiece for actually creating my mold. Other things that you can use is stuff like Monster Clay, which is a wax-based clay, and it's sulfur-free. Anything that's sulfur in it will not allow your silicone to cure, so you just want to make sure that you're using something that is sulfur-free. And yeah, so this is number one. I'm going to be covering this before I actually do the silicone mold on top of it with some sealant. So I have just Mod Podge here. This is just a gloss sealant glue. So I'm going to be covering that since the wood is porous and we don't want the wood to basically kind of get stuck in the mold. So that's what that is for. Now, some of this other stuff is going to vary by person to person. This is just what I happen to have on hand that should work. So we're just going to roll with that. But one is this here. This is just a very cheap, very, very cheap little matte cutting board type thing that I found in a pack of, I think, 4 or 5 from Target. And they were like $15 for all of them. So I'm going to be using this to actually glue my, my piece of wood filigree to this because I don't want to have any of the silicone like leaking underneath of it, and it needs to be completely flush. So I'm going to be using this, and because it is super, super flimsy, I have another firmer cutting board that I found at Costco that is going to basically be my base so that I can move this around. Once I get everything sort of set here and I have my mold sort of casing done, I'm actually going to be going outside to pour the silicone itself because it has fumes, of course. So I want to be as careful as I can and not do that in my house. Now, once my filigree is sealed and hot glued to my base or to my mat, I'm going to be using some of this. This is a sulfur-free, non-drying molding clay because I want to be able to use this and reuse this for making basically the shell. So the filigree is going to go down on here. I'm going to be using this to create sort of like a moat or a barrier around it that the mold or that the silicone is actually going to get poured into. So the mold is not going to be the prettiest thing in the world, but I don't have like a box that I can rip into or any kind of like a plastic bowl or something that I can easily get the mold out of when it's all done. With something like this, once it's completely done curing, I can just rip this off and I'll have my mold, and then I can reuse this for, you know, other projects since it is non-drying. Now, some of the other basics that I have are things like this. I have my mixing cups that have my measurements on it. I have my mixing sticks and whatnot. I also have my nice handy dandy respirator, which is going to save my life and my lungs. I also have my, my gloves and things so that I can protect my hands. And then, of course, the silicone. Now, if you've ever looked into silicone itself, you have probably seen that there are 1,000,002 types of silicone out there, and they are all for different purposes. And I think sometimes it's really just, you know, your own personal preference on what it is that you want to use. You have ones that are skin safe, which is, I think the main one is by Smooth On. I think it's called Monster Skin or something like that. I actually have like a gallon of it in my garage because I have this wild idea that eventually I'm going to get around to making swimmable mermaid tops, and I'm going to hand sculpt a sheet of all of the scales and things that are going to go on it. So that's a project coming up here for the summer. But that's like one type of silicone. And then you have other silicones that are super flexible, some that are super fast curing, some of them that take like 4 to 6 hours to cure and longer, some of them that are, you know, a medium weight, heavy weight in terms of their flexibility. So the one that I'm going to be using for this project today is kind of what I would consider a mid-tier one because it's not super rigid, but it's not super flexible either. It's sort of right in between. This is a 20A Platinum Silicone Clear that I found on Amazon, literally for half the price compared to the name brand stuff that you would find on Amazon as well or buying directly from them. I think the name brand stuff was going to cost me $200 for the same amount, and this one cost me around $70 for all of this, and this is going to make a lot of molds for me. So this is the stuff I'm going to be using today. It's a 1-to-1 ratio with a 30-minute working time. So basically I have 30 minutes from the time I mix it to the time I pour it and to get my project done and set. And then it's a 3 to 5 hour demold time. So I'm going to check it probably around 4 hours to see if it's cured and if it's done. And we're going to see how everything kind of pans out. And once this part is done and I have my mold, I can give it a test run with my hot glue and we can, you know, fingers crossed that this goes well. First up is adding the sealant to the wooden onlay, and a couple of things to keep in mind here. One, you want to be really aggressive with adding a heavy coat and making sure you get into absolutely every single crevice. The other thing to keep in mind is you want to try to avoid bubbles because any bubbles in the sealant that dries will end up in the mold. Next is just gluing down the wooden onlays directly to my flexible cutting mat. And this is not going to stay here forever. This is actually going to help make it super easy for me to peel up. Looking back on all this now, I really wish I would have added even more hot glue to the bottom, which you're going to find out why I wish I had done that later on. Next is to create the barrier that the silicone is going to be poured into and housed in. So for this, again, I'm just using an oil-free, sulfur-free, non-drying clay that I found on Amazon and just creating my little box here. And I'm also making sure that the bottom portion is really sealed by just taking the end of some tweezers. You can use sculpting tools or a popsicle stick to do this as well. And I'm really trying to make sure that there is no possible area that there could be any leakage for the silicone itself. It's also really important to not skimp on the amount of clay you're using here because you do not want this thing to collapse while the liquid is setting. Now, of course, it's time to don the super sexy safety gear and get to work on pouring the silicone. Now, this is a much larger mold and I'm gonna have to do this in batches. I'm starting with 5 ounces of each, and then each silicone seems to have a different amount of time that you need to be stirring for. This one called for a minimum of 2 to 3 minutes, so once that part was done, it was time to pour. For this project, I ended up using a total of 28 ounces of silicone. So 14 ounces of part A and 14 ounces of part B. So because I was trying to watch the camera and pour at the same time, I did not end up pouring this nearly high enough up as I should have to avoid a lot of the air bubbles that I ended up getting later. Now, I definitely did not end up with nearly the amount of bubbles that I could have, but I really do wish that I would have taken the time to pour this from a much higher space. Once everything was poured, it was really just the waiting game, and this one called for 3 to 5 hours of setting time for demolding, and I ended up just letting this sit overnight, and it was totally fine. Now, the demolding process is actually kind of satisfying. To get the clay off, it's really just a matter of gently pulling it away from the silicone, and I'm doing this gently because I don't want to risk actually ripping or tearing the silicone, even though it's a pretty strong one. And once I get a little bit away from the edge, I'm able to just break the clay off and then start gently pulling it the rest of the way. Now, this clay is actually pretty cool because I can use it for both sculpting purposes as well as creating barriers, and it never dries out. It is just really, really good stuff to have on hand for projects like this. To store it, I'm just popping it into a gallon-size Ziploc bag and putting it away for the next time. It's super easy to actually demold the onlays. All I'm doing is just peeling off the flexible plastic mat. And you'll notice the hot glue does not stick to the mat whatsoever, so I can keep reusing that mat over and over again. Now, here's where I kind of screwed up on this project. Because I did not use enough hot glue that came all the way to the very edge of each of the wooden onlays, some of the silicone actually seeped underneath and ended up causing a little bit of problems. And it's really a super easy fix. I'm just taking an X-Acto knife and tracing around the edge of the onlay, not going all the way over into the silicone itself, but just tracing directly onto that edge so that I still create a little bit of a lip for the mold itself. And then it just pops right out, which is also exactly why that sealant is so important so that your onlays do not get stuck into the silicone itself. I just continue along in this fashion until all of them are completely out, and it actually goes pretty quickly. And I forgot to mention before, you can actually find a lot of really cool, very unique onlays at your local antique shops. You can find ones that are made out of wood, plaster, and even metal, and a lot of times they're just things off of old pieces of antique furniture or from walls from old houses. Now it's time for the moment of truth. How accurate did all of these come out? And I'm actually going to show you something else too. So I thought I would quickly show you the difference here between using a 60 watt and 100 watt setting on your glue gun and why it is so important. So I just have one of these. It's they consider it, I guess, a professional glue gun. It's just a heavy duty glue gun, and this is in the standard size, not the mini. So I have a 100 watt setting and a 60 watt setting. So for these ones, I always use the 100 watt setting. Here's one that I did in this mold here at the 60 watt setting, and you can really see like it has a lot of sort of bits that didn't get connected because the glue had already started to dry before it had an opportunity to sort of melt into the rest of it. So you get this really, kind of pitted looking filigree, which doesn't look very pretty, and it's all right when it gets spray painted, but you still have all of these pits and it just doesn't look very clean. This is the same one using the 100 watt setting. And you can see how much cleaner it turns out. You can see all of the detail work. There's a lot less pitting. I still have a few of these, and I think this might be because I have some bubbles in my mold. But overall, the actual filigree itself comes out looking way better and like it's actually one full piece. So I'm gonna go and spray paint these down, and then you can really see the differences. Okay, these are now spray painted and dried, and I'm pretty happy with how these molds turned out. So here is like an example I'm really stoked. You can even see like the wood grain and everything in it. Some of these little notches and whatnot are actually from air bubbles that got into the mold itself. And I had a feeling that was going to happen because when I was pouring it, I wasn't pouring it from like a really high area. Usually if you want to avoid air bubbles, you want to pour it like really high up, and it helps to avoid that. I didn't do that, and I'm definitely regretting that. So that's okay. I'm still really happy with these, and honestly, it gives it kind of more of an antique-y look. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Here again, I can show you the differences between the 60-watt setting and the 100-watt setting. So this one is using the 100-watt setting. You can see how nice and clean that turned out. You can see the wood grain, like everything turned out so well, and it looks like one uniformed piece. Here is that 60-watt version. And you can see like the glue was drying in certain spots before like the rest of it kind of flowed over it. So you end up with sort of this, like it's kind of gone through, you know, getting run over and all of that. It just doesn't have that same sort of uniformed look, and it's just not that pretty. So if you're having trouble with your molds and things and you're using hot glue and you're wondering what's wrong, check the setting of the glue gun that you're using. Chances are it might be at a 60 and you need to be closer to 100 watts. So yeah, these turned out really great. They're super, super flexible. They're not going to break on you or anything. So I am looking forward to using these on one of my upcoming projects. So that about wraps up this video. I hope you found it somewhat informative and it inspires you to make some of your own silicone molds. And yeah, I've definitely found this method to be much more economical in the long run. Even though the cost of the silicone up front is a little bit high, it is definitely, silicone's expensive, you know, $77 for the 2 tubs that I have, or for part A and part B. So yeah, the 2 tubs that I have, and so other types of silicone out there that are more name brand get even more expensive. It's everybody's own personal preference. But I have found that even with the cost of that, and I get maybe 8 to 10 or so molds out of it that are this size or larger, it ends up being roughly about $10 or so per mold that I'm paying in the long run, versus spending for the same size and the same type, maybe not the same design for sure, but I'm spending anywhere between $20 to $50 for a single mold that is larger. So it saves money in the long run. It's definitely, you know, if you have the space, you have the time and the energy to do it, I definitely recommend it. These here, like I said, you can find these on Amazon. You can find them in Home Depot and Lowe's and any of your home improvement places. They are actually called Onlays, I figured out. They are wooden Onlays. So I would say just look for anything that is 15 centimeters or larger, and you will find ones that will be perfect for your project. So like this one here, you can see sort of like the size comparison. These things are big. These are really, really big onlays. So I'm super stoked with how they came out. I can't wait to make more of them. And yeah, I hope it inspires you to go and create something magical. That actually looks pretty good. What are you doing? You can lay down, you know, instead of just like walking around in circles. And hey, before you go, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to all my Substack and Patreon supporters, because without you, my content wouldn't be possible.